Welcome to the final night in Davos at the Ethereum Lounge. Woo! My name is Amanda Edelman, and I'm CMO of ConsenSys. I'm happy to host you here in the lounge tonight. We have a wonderful panel coming up. I'm going to hand off the mic to Samantha Stein, our moderator. Samantha is a World Economic Forum media leader, and she's going to be telling you some more about our panelists and our wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. So today we have Joe Lubin, who needs no introduction. He is the founder of ConsenSys and the co-founder of Ethereum. To my left, we have Sheila Warren, who's the head of DLT for the World Economic Forum, which is conveniently why we are all here, besides this wonderful conversation. And then we have Thomas Crampton, who's recently joined as Global Chairman of Digital for Edelman. And today we're going to discuss some pretty drastic changes we're seeing in power and money, topics that are pretty subversive here in this community. Sheila, can you start us off by telling us broad strokes? Your work has a lot to do with looking at 4IR and the different trends we're seeing amongst these topics. Can you paint us a picture of what the left's seeing today?
Yeah, sure. So I work at our San Francisco outpost, which is called the Center for the Fourth Revolution, 4IR. And what we really do is look at blockchain not in isolation, but we examine policy interventions that we think are actually going to help mitigate risks of the technology and accelerate social good and social impact. But even more than that, we look at the intersections among different technologies that are emerging. So as machine learning, as the vast amounts of data that come through 5G, IoT sensors, and all these different things, we try to examine what is the intersection of these technologies and how do we really be quite mindful about the systems that we're creating. And a lot of those systems are really, the hope is that they're going to transform a lot of the ways we think about money, which of course many of us equate to power. I would argue those are distinct concepts and it's important to separate them, but certainly the massive amount of wealth creation we saw in this space last year led to a lot of really fundamental and foundational questions about how we as a space are addressing some of these challenges.
And so if we're not conflating money and power, then what are the new economic models we're seeing?
Yeah, well, I think we have a lot of potential with our specific technology we all care about the most, which is, of course, blockchain technology. I think that we're looking at different examples of, let's put it this way, as you reduce the distance between an end user, a consumer, and a producer, for an example, okay, as you eliminate platform plays, middlemen, rent extraction of any kind that happens all along a supply chain, for example. If you can collapse some of that, you're not just making things more efficient, and that tends to be, I think, a lot of the view of some of the more institutional players in this space, things are more efficient, they're faster, this kind of thing. But there's a lot more that's profound going on, right? The profound transformation is that the shortening of that distance is actually empowering consumers. It's actually empowering producers, and that's happening in certain parts of the world that have not historically had access to systems that empower them, but instead to systems that fundamentally exploit them.
So if we're seeing a shift from Web 2.0, where we're using data as the model for currency, and it's being used to make our lives more convenient, and now in Web 3.0, we're saying, okay, we're going to be able to monetize that ourselves, we're going to have these great blockchain-centric models for doing that. What does the world look like in terms of trust of these shifting models? Can you paint that picture for us? I know Edelman does a really great report every year called the Trust Barometer.
Yeah, so I think that trust is an inherent part when you're trying to introduce these new technologies, which I think the challenge is a lot around the trust actually in the technologies themselves. If you look at blockchain, it's often referred to as the trust machine, which is fantastic in and of itself, but the challenge is how do you get people to believe in that machine, how do you get them to understand the implications of what they're doing, and how they use it. So as we see levels of trust right now challenged in many of the traditional domains, government, media, business, getting trust into something new like this is going to be that much more challenging.
And where did we see the greatest shifts in trust occur this year?
So if you, in 10 days into working at Edelman, I'm now telling you how the trust barometer has worked over the last 20 years, to my understanding. What the trust barometer has shown over the 19 years it's been done is it showed very early on the rise of NGOs, it showed the dispersion of authority, it showed a fall in trust of CEOs over time. What it's showing now, interestingly, over the last year is a continued drop in the trust in governments, not surprisingly, but a rise in the trust of my employer. So there's this trust that's been built up now, which is perhaps the fact that you are paying me on a monthly basis, therefore I have.
I'm not, for the record.
Open to it. So therefore I trust my employer, and also I feel that it's somebody who's close enough that I can affect change. If I complain to my employer, she might change things. And it shows this rise of or continued rise of the influence, the importance of influencers who are trusted online friends or connections in that way.
And an interesting thing about the trust machine is that it's deeply tied to reputation. And so as we see reputation scale, which we've seen happen one way we put it is that if I was in a room with a bunch of people, I might be less likely to call something out I thought was inappropriate because I wouldn't have as much of a dopamine hit from the reputational feedback than I would online if I knew everyone in my community and far beyond would give me that recognition, and that may shift my reputational score, how I'm perceived. How is the shift in digital affecting reputation and how we interact with that as a society?
Well, I think one simple thing is that we now have video everywhere. So in terms of people doing things, and we saw this first, actually, I've based for a long time out in Asia, just moved fairly recently to London. The ability of ubiquitous cameras to show corruption, to show misbehavior, suddenly became a very powerful thing, which on some levels broke down trust, but then built up this trust that people are going to look out for me, and I'm going to be able to, it's sort of a dispersed authority model, where people have trust that they're going to be able to share that, and they feel empowered because of that, their ability to reach out and not have to go through channels where they feel they might not be heard or might not get a fair say.
Joe, what are some of the concrete...
Can I jump in there just a little bit? That there are different levels of the trust machine, and some of the foundational layers don't necessarily rely on reputation. But we're trying to figure out, it'll take quite a while, how to do governance, how to apply reputation in a much more rigorous way, where it's not just likes, and it's not just potentially positive feedback, but as academics and as we in our ecosystem have come to believe, just positive feedback can enable you to build some pretty good systems. Positive feedback, getting paid Bitcoin or Ether for validating transactions and securing the network, but there's still lots of exploits that you can do in a situation like that. The movement to proof of stake recognizes that shaping behavior in a system with both reward and punishment makes a lot of sense. And so we're going to figure out ways at those higher layers of the trust machine, in a music industry protocol or a journalism protocol, where people put stake on that platform and can get docked if their community feels that they've done something inappropriate.
And as we move from Web 2.0's model to Web 3.0's model, what are some of the ways you think it makes the most sense to conceptualize building self-sovereign IDs or blockchain-based identity systems?
That's an easy question. Thank you. So there's an organization.
You're welcome. The harder ones will come later.
Exactly. Just looking at Brian.
Audience, tee them up, please.
Yeah. So there is an entity that ConsenSys and our Uport project was involved in founding. Microsoft and other entities are involved in it. It's the Decentralized Identity Foundation, and it's essentially a group and specification for evolving the definition or a construct for identity. It's a self-sovereign identity. It's an identity that I can establish for myself, for my organization, or potentially for devices, sensors, etc. And it's agnostic to the technology, so I could establish identities without exposing them publicly. But I can also register my identity. I can register one of these decentralized IDs as the root of my identity on a network like Ethereum, so it enhances what Ethereum is and what you can do on Ethereum, and Ethereum also enhances that particular construct. Associated with this, we have personal data lockers like the 3-box toolkit that enables us to encrypt our personal information, share it in decrypted form granularly in situations that we designate. And so it moves us essentially from being in a siloed, walled garden Web 2.0 world where we are the product. I'm sure you've all heard that on numerous occasions, to a world of decentralized protocols, the decentralized web, or Web 3.0, where you have trusted transactions, automated agreements, decentralized storage and bandwidth and compute, heavy compute and identity and proof of location. So many different protocols that are interoperative with one another, but they're all in service of the user. They're all constructed in a way so that Web3 will be user-centric, I believe.
And so when we say user-centric, what we often mean is that, okay, there's been Apple and Facebook and all of these big tech companies using your data, monetizing off of it. Now it's time for us to claim a stake in that and to receive some of the dividends. Is having our data leased out enough to really do that? Is governance going to happen at a data level, or is it going to happen in other ways?
So governance will happen in many different ways. With respect to personal information, I think Facebook and Google, et cetera, are still going to be able to collect some of our information and potentially monetize it. It depends how GDPR and other discussions in our society move forward. So at least there's a lot of awareness that those organizations and their use of technology has outgrown usefulness and become exploitative. But the really valuable information, financial information, health information, that's stuff that should be user-centric. I should be owning my personal health information. I should be able to use it to maintain my health, to optimize my health, and you need one of these personal data lockers in order to do that sort of thing. But it can't be just a centralized system that's maintained on my laptop. I may want to de-identify the information and share the information with a research study, which is very hard to do right now if I don't control my data. And I might also want to get insurance, and I might need to share certain information. The insurance company shouldn't really trust that that the data is accurate, that I'm being honest, and so we need attestations which are well done between decentralized identities on blockchains, and we need timestamping, which is also well done. So if we have this really high value data, it's coming from people, it's coming from devices. There's going to be just an enormous constellation of sensors and other devices that constitute the Internet of Things that are feeding either raw data or processed data into data markets. And so my personal information, if I choose to put it there, can be on a data market. It can be, somebody could pay me more to identify where this data came from, and I could choose to monetize it that way. So monetization will be under my control in a granular way, rather than, and the Facebooks and the Googles can still monetize that information. They're just going to have to pay us for more of that. One really important issue is that essentially there's an AI arms race going on, and 30 years ago, the algorithms were roughly the same, but there was no compute and there was no data, so all we could do was toy problems. Now there's an astonishing amount of compute and data, and a very few organizations have both. And so it's a very narrow arms race in the AI space. Once we put all of this data on data markets, from sensors, from people, et cetera, it will at least level the playing field or make it a much broader arms race.
And I think it's helpful to think of privacy as a spectrum. And so one thing GDPR did, and I mean, people have admitted GDPR was written and contemplated before blockchain technology was kind of a really known thing to governments, right? So it kind of is a really Web 2.0 reactive regulation, which is not to say it doesn't have a lot of merit. I think the approach it's taking is more user-centric than what we've seen in the past. But I think that there is a spectrum of privacy, and so the convenience trade-off that people made have made all through Web 2.0 and that we still make today when I give my cookie consent on whatever I want to read, right? And I was a privacy lawyer, so I know what I'm doing when I do that. You don't care about certain layers of information. You care an awful lot about other kinds of information. And what I think is quite fascinating to track in terms of GDPR is the RTBF, like the right to be forgotten is a really profound concept. And it's something that's not possible right now. It's kind of binary. Once you give your data into the thing, you can't really be granular about what you're permissioning. It's just kind of there. And so what I really think is going to be exciting about this shift, it's not so much that people are going to necessarily choose to be that level of specificity on every single piece of data about them, because a lot of it you honestly don't feel that proprietary or personal sense about it or emotionally connected to it. But the things that you do care about, you'll have a lot more ability to be quite prescriptive about what can be done with it. And then more importantly, the ability to exit a system is something that's not meaningful right now. Like even now, if I were to tell, if I deleted my whatever social media account, that data is in the wind. I mean, forget it. There's no way of retracting that. But when I think about my children and what the experience they're going to have is they're going to have that second order is going to be visible to them in a way it's not to us right now, which is part of what I think the big concern has been.
So the technology is evolving pretty rapidly with respect to GDPR, the right to be forgotten. We're moving towards a world where we're going to control our own information. We're moving towards a world where we might have attesters that we enable to access that information and answer specific questions like accredited investor or age or something like that. And we're moving even further into a world where the data sits encrypted and we run algorithms on the data that answer those kinds of questions. And so we do have some interesting solutions on the horizon.
I guess what I'd highlight is I hope we are moving that direction. I just question whether we are or not. You look at, I'm sure many people have read about in China, where you have the social credit system, where there you are, the data is going to be going across a lot of parts of your life, affecting your ability to send your children to school, depending on your credit rating in social credits, which might be docked or increased according to your political point of view or things that you've done and the people you know. And if somebody that you know has behaved badly, that might dock your social credit points. So I think that with identity, we have to be careful in ensuring, and with a lot of the digital things, I think with this at this point in the digital shift, it is no longer useful to make a distinction between digital and the rest of the world. In the way my title, chair of digital, it's like chief electricity officer. It shouldn't be there. I shouldn't have a job. 10 days in. But I think we really need to establish more traditional elements and pose questions about these issues in ways that we have dealt with these previously. Human, bills of rights, looking at these as commonses. What are the ways that we can try and ensure that we're not seeing this ability to narrow it down to so many data points about any given individual here and make that something that is much more liberating than it is constraining, because it can very easily go both ways.
Well, it's definitely going to be a constant battle, I think, between the people who want to exploit information and capture value and technology and people and systems that are trying to protect the individual.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm really eager to see and actually get both of your thoughts on. Sorry, I'm to put a question
No, you
out
guys
there.
are making my job easy. I love it.
But I'm really curious. It's something. So in its purest form, like the concepts and what we're developing here, and what the ecosystem is quickly moving towards, is the ability to basically never reveal anything about yourself, like ever, because through the attestation mechanism. But what I think is going to be fascinating is there are governments, and it's not just China. There are many governments that, when really pushed, they want to serve in that function. Like they actually think that is their role, and in many cases, it literally is their role. It's going to be very interesting to see what kinds of regulation mechanisms come out, right, to kind of make that less pure of make that pure technology not something that actually is legal, for example.
Sure. Yeah, and it's going to be a major battle of technologies, as good as the field of cryptography is and will be to protect us. We may have flying micro drones that are just watching everything we type, and I mean it's going to be a fascinating
Maybe we'll be calling Edelman to help us with 15 minutes of privacy. So I want to make sure we have some time for questions from the audience. We have about 15 minutes left. Who has the toughest question they want to start us off with? Please introduce yourself and then ask your question. Do we have an extra mic or should I walk around with this one?
I can give it to you.
Okay. No media takers? No questions about like, well, what is the crux of money and power in the future? Is this going to be the World Datanomic Forum, the World Privacy Forum? Where are we going?
Hi, my name's Michael. I'm the founder of an AI-based company in San Francisco. My question is about thinking more about data products. So I think it seems increasingly people are not going to care so much about the underlying data as in the representation of that data in AI models, what they're predicting, how they're represented in graph databases as weighted vectors. And so I think my question is, what does it mean to both regulate and educate individuals about data sovereignty, the right to delete or to be forgotten, when the real data or the real value of data is not represented in the underlying pieces of data, but rather the sort of footprint that that data leaves on AI models or complex systems where I can maybe guarantee I've deleted every piece of raw data I've ever seen of you, and I can still predict everything about you. So what does it mean to regulate that or to have the right to forget in a world in which that's more the driver?
So from what all your friends are doing, I can pretty much predict what you're going to do, in other words.
I think that's actually, another important aspect of the question, which is when you get into this stuff, it becomes quite shocking how little data I have to have about you, or even no data about you in particular, to be able to make very powerful predictions about what your behavior might be, what your purchasing habits might be. So, maybe I've asked all my data to be forgotten, but you can perfectly recreate everything about me because my friends have consented.
I didn't do it. It was my brother.
Well, and we're seeing this with genomics, right? So I mean, like just some of the, we won't name names, but some of the sites that are taking DNA samples and they're able to actually predict like who you are and what diseases you might have and your genetic makeup and all this kind of stuff. And even if you never actually entered that system, and I think this is exactly the crux of the matter, right? So one of the reasons we explore these intersections is because what is a meaningful right to be forgotten? It's a question that we're really pushing on. And so under the GDPR regulation, of course, which was again focused on a different kind of system, there is a meaningful exit. You can contemplate a meaningful exit, but like you say, how do you do that? And I think that what is going to be critical is the permissions around what you're allowed to do with that information. So that's where I see regulation moving and shifting, is it's less about the access to it. It's more like what are we as a society, in cases where we are a democratic society, electing officials who we like to think represent us, and sometimes do on occasion. We like to think like, what are we allowing companies, for example, to do with that information once it's in their domain?
I'd say there's a couple of orders on that, which I'd add to. I spent a lot of time talking to your colleague privacy lawyers with the implementation of GDPR. I'm based in the UK right now, and that's been a huge thing. And I think it's great. These things have to be thought out at the level that you're bringing it to, absolutely, and thinking about 3-4 tiers up. But the fact of the matter is, as we implement them in the real world, GDPR, getting companies to understand that is a massive challenge. So when we start talking about data sovereignty, or individuals about data sovereignty, the complexity gets that much bigger. So I think there's a huge piece in here about finding the right way to educate people and prepare them for these shifts that are happening at a pace that even this room is finding hard to deal with. And we're talking about people who are not as digitally literate as this room. So I think we have a huge challenge ahead of us.
Yeah, so the societal implications are fascinating and probably jarring. The back and forth of technology and regulation with respect to both sides of the privacy issue, I don't think anyone really knows how that's going to go in the context of the social credit system. That could be an awful dark future. One could imagine that in a freer society, the same sort of mechanisms are applied and unstoppable. And we might have activist communities that pretty much know everything there is to be known about everybody. In a context like that, maybe we all just have to be nice to each other. I don't know.
The optimist.
So real quick, I'd like to just dig a little deeper with Michael's question here. So another way to think about this is that if Michael's saying that you can use our data to create models, that then can make all of these predictions and you don't need my data anymore, then is it enough to say that we're going to have self-sovereign IDs that allow us to lease out our data and then I'm going to get paid for my data? If the real value is in the algorithm, don't I want a percentage of the algorithm in perpetuity? Am I being shortchanged even by this vision?
I mean, it's a value question, right? And so I think these are the open questions that people are really wrestling with. And so that's why I say I think some of the regulation is going to shift into this world where it's about what is owed, like what is the obligation, and what is the response, that the punitive response, essentially, if there's a violation of a permissive norm. And so I think that norm setting is something that we haven't tackled yet because we're in a world where we've just given blanket permission to various platforms to do pretty much whatever they want with our data. So we're starting almost from scratch in terms of conceptualizing this. And GDPR, which we've like harped on for just because it's there, that basically is the first attempt really at codifying some of these principles that we all kind of agree are important, but how you actually turn that into actionable, it's very challenging to do. It's very challenging.
Yeah, so I've learned things from you. I have a mental model of you. If I use that to create value for myself, do I owe you some of that? I'm happy to give you some of that. That would be fine.
You guys heard that here first. Okay, remember.
You're giving it onto me as salary.
If somebody takes a photograph of another person and uses it in some sort of advertising, there's certain rights that our society imbues to that business situation. If somebody takes a photograph of a celebrity, there are different treatments of that sort of thing. So I think if an AI company is making use of data, if that AI company has a footprint in a jurisdiction, there will be discussions and laws around the use of somebody else's property, if it is property, in the creation of a product and commercialization and sharing the value of that. So I think it's just that's a discussion that society has to have, or different regions or different countries have to have those discussions.
Yeah, and this is why I think the concept of a global consensus around any of these kinds of things, and this is what everybody wants to see, right? We want to see like we're in the Congress Center, we're talking about like, could there be this like global data regulation and general norms about this? And it's a very first world perspective, because in certain parts of the developing world, there's a completely different concept of privacy, and that's a cultural concept, and you're not going to change that, nor should you be trying to change that. It's not our place to do that. So I think it's really important. That's why I say privacy is a spectrum, because the way you even define that term is really culturally dependent. And the context is so critically important. So what I think we need to be trying to build is the option space, where you have the ability, and this is what self-sovereign identity is about, is really having this ability to decide for yourself what things you consider deeply personal and not shareable, what things you actually consider that maybe you want everyone to have access to for whatever reason, because you're, I don't know, post-millennial and you want everyone to know everything about you all the time. I have no idea. But I think it's the option space that's really important to develop.
And I couldn't agree more. What you need to do is we need to have this dialogue as open as possible. Google has their AI principles that they put out. We need other people to put what their principles are and have a conversation about what makes most sense. And that's the only way we're going to educate. At the end of the day, however, when it comes to the implementation, we're going to face the same huge challenges we face with GDPR, which is explaining it over and over again and just trying to keep educating.
We have time for one or two more questions, right here in the front.
So you said, hi, I'm Avia, a blockchain lawyer. You said that privacy is a spectrum, but do you guys see an option where we will the utilization of data will prevail over the privacy of data? Where a world where we're not going to be concerned about privacy anymore, we'll abandon that sort of idea. In the benefit of the spectrum of how do I utilize my data, or how do I get benefit out of it as the individual. Do you see that happening?
This is a bit, I think, what I'm alluding to, right? When I say some of the conversations that we're having with governments and regulators are around this exact concept. But I don't think they can be unlinked. Like, I think that the idea about utilization is fundamentally rooted in a concept that there's a privacy component to this, and that privacy or protection of an individual's privacy is important. And the reason you care about rights to use and access rates and permissions on those things is because you fundamentally, I think, care about privacy. So I think they collapse a little bit, but I do agree with you. I think that there's a very first world version of this that focuses on privacy in this sort of like libertarian anarchist way, where it's like this fundamental thing that is so core, and most of the world doesn't actually see it that way. It's linked to, why do I care about it as actually a very critical component of it. So yeah.
Yeah, so cryptographic technologies are very powerful. Other technologies will be very powerful. People will always innovate. The builders will build, and the hackers and the breakers will find lots of holes and cracks in those systems. I think it comes down to what's acceptable in a society. I think we're going to just have this back and forth, and I think each society will find a balance. So if a society is filled with, quote, good people who have meaningful jobs and access to all the things that they need to have excellent lives, and they're grounded with good family, etc., there will be far fewer people who are interested in pushing the dark net technology, the technologies that essentially are more exploitative than constructive. So it's kind of incumbent on us to build a world that is plentiful, where people are all free to make their own best decisions because the resources and the information is there for everybody.
Thank you, Joe. Are there certain privacy-preserving technologies that you're most excited about?
I think digging a deep hole in the ground and filling it with concrete, and so
Please don't do that.
Putting your information there, so that one's pretty solid. But again, they're amazing. There's like just magical cryptographic technology that is already available. It's computationally very intensive, so you can't use it for a lot of situations right now. But breakthroughs are being made very regularly in making it viable to use it in the real world. But again, it's
So we're talking like
science fiction writers can think of a lot of exploits, and science fiction generally leads reality. Yeah.
Great. I think we have another question in the back here.
Hi, my name is Jacob. I'm an entrepreneur and investor. I have a question regarding equity in society, because I think there's a lot of concern around technology driving inequity to extremes, and blockchain being seen as a remedy. But the first, let's say, mass scale adoption of blockchain technologies is actually, if you look at the Gini coefficient of the first blockchains and crypto assets, it's very depressing. So, and I'm wondering, as if we see this future where I have a data locker, I can trade my private data, I think I would be in a situation where I could afford I could afford my privacy. But what if I cannot afford my privacy? Or what's the level of consumer protection you need to avoid exploitation based on, let's say, social levels of let's say, privilege or wealth?
So that's a great question. I want to frame it a little bit more by just adding that you brought up Gini coefficient. So this is an economic measurement of wealth disparity. And when we look at the Gini coefficient of people who hold Bitcoin specifically, it's actually, we have greater social inequality there than North Korea. So I'm just going to lay that out there as we answer this question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this talks to me, this talks to this way in which the digital world is mimicking the real world, and we need to bring in some of the thinking and hard work that's gone on in the real world to try and, admittedly unsuccessfully, address these problems. Because the challenge is with digital, you can exaggerate everything, the good and the bad. And we've got to find the way through responsibly talking about these things, responsibly discussing the real implications of them, sharing that as openly as possible. And as we're trying to see if blockchain is a solution for these things, the best thing we can do is talk openly about the strengths, the challenges. And that's only through that discussion are we going to be able to raise the level of understanding so that we can actually take action and do something hopefully more effectively in GDPR in some ways, but really address these issues.
Yeah, so the Gini coefficient in the crypto space was absolutely horrendous when Satoshi held all the tokens. And same with Ethereum, first day of launch of the platform.
Who held those?
Lots of people. I think it was 93 people who worked on the project and 9,000 other transactions. As we have more and more of these systems, more and more people are owning value on those systems. Ethereum is a protocol-based open platform on which you can build applications. It's permissionless. Anybody can have real agency on that platform. On some of those applications on Ethereum can be protocol-based open platforms for the music industry, for the journalism industry. So I really believe that and these systems aren't used yet compared to 10 years from now when I believe they will be very heavily used around the world. So I believe that we'll build layers and layers of these protocol-based open platforms, and content creators will be able to directly access their consumers. Resource providers, service providers will be able to access the users of their resources or systems. And I believe there will be much more agency for many more people around the world. I really think that the nature of work is going to change dramatically.
And I think it's, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I actually think it's really important to separate out the Gini coefficient issue, which is obviously a huge issue. I mean, like, wealth creation in our society is fundamentally just a total mess, right? And a lot of that is because of who we empower to take risk in our society. And who do we empower? We empower the same people over and over and over again from the same countries over and over and over again. So you don't have the same ability to essentially invest in something, right, like early stage of a cryptocurrency, for example, or be even privy to the fact that it exists if you're in a certain demographic. It's just, these are just the realities of our society. And changing that is a much bigger conversation than we're going to be able to solve in any one particular sector or ecosystem. But I think it's important to be very mindful of that, particularly as it pertains to control of a system, because that's where it really gets critical, right? Because you can kind of put that in a box over here, and you can say, what are we doing with the technology? Because fundamentally, if it's about user empowerment, we have an opportunity to say, okay, so yes, the wealth creation in the space went in this direction, it went this way, but we're mitigating any control issues over these systems by doing X, Y, and Z thing, which we're doing. And fundamentally, the application, what we're doing with this technology can be about user empowerment. And so I think your question really hits on fundamentals of development economics, right? Like, how do you avoid this paternalistic top-down sort of approach to things? At the same time, how do you acknowledge cultural difference? I mean, and I think the important thing to be very mindful of to everyone who's building in this space is we are not immune to any of these questions. However, we also are not starting from scratch. These are very well, and I say this over and over and over again, you're building on the shoulders of giants. There are a lot of people who have thought a lot about civic technology, community-driven technology, methodologies and models for engaging your end user. And it's not just about beta testing. It's about the communities that you're actually trying to empower and engaging them in your process and in your methodology. So we can do that. We're not so far enough along that we've lost the ability to do that and kind of engage these communities in a way that's much more about meeting their needs and being responsible and accountable.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hi. What are the most recent technology that connect virtual identity on the chain and the real people to ensure the authenticity of the ID? Thank you.
So we have a project called UPort. UPort is used in this country, in Zug, to enable citizens to access government services. That's used on the Swiss rail. They're doing a pilot there. The way that works, and it can work in many different ways, is a person establishes their identity on a blockchain, and then they go into a government agency and they show their passport or something like that, so that the government agent verifies that this identity on the blockchain corresponds to this person. And you could do that with a video interview. If it's a high value identity or attestation, then you probably want to have some sort of in-person interview or interactive online interview. You might want to make a recording of that and store that. But this root identity can be attested to by many different entities. So Department of Motor Vehicles can attest that you're licensed to drive till January 2023. There could be some game that basically attests that you have a license to play the game, and they're not going to need you to show up in their office. So they'll just need some aspect to link your identity to access to their system.
How about the biometrical?
Sure. So biometrics are great in terms of ease of use, but they can shift over time. So they should be one of the factors that you can use for low-value transactions, for low-value identity or attestation establishment. Often you only need one factor. If I'm paying for a coffee at a Starbucks and I'm using cryptocurrency from some account, maybe Coinbase or whoever it is comfortable with me paying low-value transactions with just one factor to identify me, and maybe that's just a thumbprint or something like that, or maybe it's just a password. If I'm moving large amounts of value from one corporation to another corporation, you can have many different factors required from many different people, perhaps.
And of course, while this is a blockchain-centric panel, there are non-blockchain solutions. So India, for example, has a biometric system that serves 1 billion people that some find to be very useful, others find it very controversial. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope that you learned a bit more about this transition from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0. And please, demand that you get a percentage of that algorithm and not just the trading of the data. Okay, remember that bit and the thing Joe said about owing me something? Yeah. Thank you.